A very good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special bottle-aged sherry tasting for Sherry Week. I'm Ruben, and I guess most of you will know me from my website, Sherry Notes, on all kinds of sherry wines, and maybe also from my yearly tradition of organizing a Twitter tasting with sherry wines. And for this crazy special year, I wanted to take this idea to a next level. As you know, maybe that bottle-aged sherry is a topic close to my heart, and maybe some of you already watched the roundtable session I did with César and Ferran, who are also here tonight. A session hosted by Lustau. If you haven't seen it already, I've heard the news that from today they're also available on the website as a podcast, so it's really interesting to check it out. We discussed bottle aging with Terry there, and I really wanted to pair this to some examples. So what I did was select 3 very old bottles of sherry, some different styles, some going back to the 1990s, but one of them even further to the 1960s. I picked these because they are also possible to pair to something that still exists today. So the wines are still on the market today, and we can try them here head to head and side by side and check what the effects would be of 20 to 60 years of cellar. So here we are. We have 3 wonderful guests online in the video stream. What you can't see is that there are also a number of wine writers and bloggers who have received the samples as well. They can follow us online and they can post their comments in a private chat. These comments and remarks can then be shown on the screen so we can see what they're saying as well. But first, let me introduce my guests. First, we have César Saldaña, who was until recently the general director of the Consejo Regulador, and now since a couple of weeks the new president. He is a native of Jerez. He holds a degree in economics, and he spent most of his career in the wine business, I think with González Vías and Sandeman, for instance. Now he has been at the Consejo for almost 20 years, if I'm correct. César, it's an honor to have you here. Welcome again.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Thank you for having me.
And also thank you to you and your team for making this possible, of course.
My pleasure.
Well, then we have Sarah Jane Evans. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Sarah is a British Master of Wine and an award-winning writer with, I think, two special interests, Spanish wines in general, and then sherry wines specifically, I think. She became Master of Wine with a dissertation on almacenistas in sherry, so she's well aware of the whole sector. And now Sarah is one of the best-known writers when it comes to Spain, recently with a book on the north of Spain, and now I think you're preparing something on central and southern Spain, is that correct?
Yes, but I mean, was a part of that is I need to travel to come and being stuck in London.
Exactly.
It's a problem, but I will be back.
And then is sherry a big part of your new book?
Yes, indeed. But unfortunately, I have to pack it into a book which also covers Mediterranean Spain, central and southern Spain, and there is so much happening. So sure. Sherry, I have to show British balance. I have to give it equilibrium.
We're looking forward to that already. Yeah. And then, last but not least, we have Ferran Centelles, who was the head sommelier at ElBulli restaurant until they closed. And now he's still working for ElBulli Foundation, I think. He's also a judge, a wine teacher, and a Spanish specialist for Jensen Robinson, for instance. I noticed, Ferran, that Sherry Week is very busy for you.
Nice. No. I'm super excited about today's tasting.
Okay.
So yeah, really the bottles, they look beautiful, and I can wait. Thank you very much for the invitation and to make it happen. And thank you for the topic. which we're
My
talking
pleasure.
about. It's super cool and super interesting and a great topic to discuss.
Okay. Well, I think you're referring to the fact that bottle aging is a bit of a controversial topic, perhaps something that isn't really common, not even in the sherry region itself. And then the majority of producers keep telling us that their wine should be drunk as soon as possible, and there's no potential for keeping them in a cellar. But on the other hand, I've always been inspired by people like you, sommeliers who really have an interest in old bottles and who keep telling us that it's so much fun and such an exciting topic to explore. So, César, if I may ask you a question first before we start. According to you, what's the reason for producers telling us that sherry has such a short shelf life? Is it a bit? Are they afraid of having people become disappointed in wines that haven't been preserved that well?
Well, I don't think the issue here and the message, in fact, is sherry has a short shelf life. I mean, I think the official message that unfortunately we've been passing around for many years is that once we bottle, sherry is ready to be drunk, and well, there's no improvement in having the wine in the bottle for years, right? I mean, the message was very clear: drink it now. I mean, we have bottled it, drink it now, right? And I think historically, and I'm talking only the last maybe 50, 60 years, historically there were two reasons for that message. One, affecting, because we have to differentiate, and I think through the tasting we will see that very clearly, biologically aged wines and oxidatively aged wines. I think there's and I would say a third one, sweet wines, right? This is why I think the selection is so good. In the case of oxidative aging, you know, we're talking about wines with little fruit, with a high alcohol content, maybe historically, I repeat, for many people closer to the world of spirits than to the world of wine. So they're very stable. So they will not improve. This is the product. This is it. And after a number of years, this will be the product, right? Yeah. In the case of biological aging was a very different thing. I think it's a little bit more complicated. The assumption from the producers has always been, and I'm talking because there's a big change as from the 70s and 80s, right? The assumption from the producers was, okay, what they're asking for if they order a fino or a manzanilla is a product that is fresh, that is pale, and that is light, right? So in that time, I would say at the end of the 70s, the purpose was to satisfy that need. I mean, and probably this is when we started with an extra, how would I say, too much filtration, too much stabilization processes, right? The aim being, we're having a boom in sales. We have to guarantee that we will be able to supply light, fresh, and pale, right? And pale was an important issue, particularly in Spain for a long time. And this is why we started with extra filtration. Obviously, if you extra filtrate a wine, you're diminishing, you're weakening the wine, and therefore the potential for bottle aging, it's dramatically reduced. I think that was the issue with the biologically aged wine. So obviously, when we talk about wines like those that you brought today here, and for instance, this beautiful Solear and Rama, we're not talking about a wine that you know, when they designed this one, they were not thinking on paleness, they were not thinking on lightness. They might be thinking a little bit on freshness, but there were other elements in the one that they were looking for, right? So obviously, if you want to have a bottle aging, when you need structure, you need certain elements in the wine that will interact and evolve in time. And with very weak, very pale, very light finos and manzanillas, there was no way for positive bottle evolution. I think this is the reason. So it's not so much telling the people there's no shelf life here. is about telling people, well, drink it now. It's fresh, it's nice, it's ready to be drunk.
Yeah. Okay. And Sarah, maybe you can compare to other wine regions. I mean, for instance, in Bordeaux wines or other classical wines, it's a very common idea to have it in your cellar and make it a bit more round before you actually drink it.
Yes, this is
do that with sherry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating case with sherry that César has talked about, because I have here the Sacca de Otoño 1999, and in the education that I used to receive, or one did receive from the Classical Wine and Spirit Education Trust, it was that if you had something like this, an old Sacca, then it was bound to explode. It was unsafe. It was as if I was carrying a little bomb, because it was going to start fermenting, and all these terrible things that were in this sherry were somehow, and the fact that Barbadillo, who have done it for so long, have such a history of this was somehow terribly dangerous, and really they shouldn't have done it. So on the one side, we were getting this message that we were being told that sherry produced these wines, but actually exactly, they knew how we should drink them, and the way we should drink them is now because they were ready to drink. And in fact, if you think about it, I was doing a webinar for Rioja last week, and one of the messages that was so classically given about Gran Reserva is the same thing, that they've done the cellaring for you, now you drink it. Not, we don't have a conversation in Rioja about, oh, now you keep this wine for 10, 15, 20 years because it goes on getting better. So it's just that there hasn't been a conversation about it. On the other hand, I must say, I come from a country and a culture where we all know that our grandmothers had an open bottle of sherry in the cupboard, which they kept for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. And that was also a culture that we had. And that wasn't because, sherry was understood to be this indestructible drink. But the idea that it should be something that should develop character and should become different over time, and that those differences should be exciting, is something simply that until now, and conversations like this, we've never really explored. What we've now moved into in the last few years is this terrific diversity of sherry between bodegas, between styles. And, I learned once that I had either Fino or Manzanilla or Oloroso or Amontillado, but now I learn about all the other different categories. And the great thing is that Jerez is now not frightened about talking about those. It can share and enjoy its differences.
I think premiumization is also part of the renewed interest here, I think, because you talked about grannies in the UK having their bottle of Bristol cream in the cupboard. I wouldn't necessarily make everyone do that and expect the sherry to evolve or anything.
Yeah.
For today, I've selected a couple of really high-end, full-bodied sherries, and let's just move to the first sherry, if you like. So the first bottle I selected was a benchmark Manzanilla from Bodegas Barbadillo. It's one of the most commonly available Manzanillas in the whole of Spain. It exists in a light version, so the classic cellar is around 6 years of age, which you see here on screen, and then they have an older version of around 8 to 9 years, Manzanilla en Rama. And this is really, for me at least, a benchmark wine because, for instance, it started the whole en Rama movement, the idea of filtering less and bringing out wines as closely possible to what is kept in the bodega. So they were really the first to do that. Then also they had the idea of releasing seasonal saccas, seasonal releases. So they have 4 versions each year, and you can witness the evolution of the layer of flor throughout the year. And then last but not least, let's not forget that they were also one of the producers who introduced or brought back Magnum bottles for sherry.
Yeah.
And this is interesting because the smaller the bottle, the quicker it will evolve in your cellar. And Magnum bottles are much more interesting. They have a very balanced way of evolving. I see Ferran with a big smile there.
No, because I have, I have great memories about this wine because at that time I was already working at ElBulli, and we actually bought quite a lot of Barbadillo Saka. And I remember people being amazed about the quality and texture, and it was a game changing, this wine. I mean, honestly, for Spanish history and high-end gastronomy, this wine was something really, really, really special, and they changed the mind of many sommeliers. So it's a very, very good pick, and I'm super happy to retaste it. It's very moving for me, very moving.
I'm glad the people of the bodega could guide us to one of the bottles from the first year in which the series was launched. So it was launched for the first time in 1999, springtime. And we are now having the autumn edition from that year. You can see that they didn't really put Solear on the bottle, so it was just a Manzanilla and Rama, not even Manzanilla Pasada. So they had this older version, but they didn't really communicate the extra aging. Two wines with 21 years in between. I have the glasses here. Let's check the color first. Already a very big difference.
Robert, just to confirm that those wines, they come direct from the winery, or
yes,
is that right?
So the old small bottles, and yes, in this case the new as well, comes directly from the winery. So they were from their historic stash.
Perfect.
I think it's particularly interesting what you said about Barbadillo opening this way for sherry, because they know very well what. I mean, they sell a lot of Solear in Spain. They sell a lot of Solear to traditional Manzanilla consumers, those consumers that would not accept. Probably back in 1999, they would not accept a bottle of Solear, which would be a little bit too dark, right? So offering such an incredible thing like an Enrama is quite outstanding. I mean, it was very brave, as you said. Probably there are a number of things that, for instance, today we talk about Magnum. It's a much more logic format for this type of wine. At that time, probably they were brave, but not brave enough to assume that someone would open a bottle, a 1.5 liter bottle, and
oh, that's good.
That was the idea. Bottles. I mean, I'm sure they were not really, 100% sure about this movement, right? Time has proved them right, but it was very brave, because at the end of the day, they were aiming at their normal consumers with something very, very different and very, very special, right? So yeah, it was very, very, very brave.
It's fascinating tasting this second wine that the first from 1999, because it tastes to me like we should only start drinking it now. I mean, why bother to drink it in 2005 or 2001? It's just at such a lovely position as a wine now. And indeed, you could say that the young one, which we so appreciate for its power, its pungency, its energy, it just jumps out of the glass. What we have now in 1999 is something which has, you begin to use all those bits of vocabulary which we might be using about mature white wines from a famous region in France or somewhere like that. It's just great.
Yeah, my point here is that I would love to see this bottle kept in a normal cellar, so like restaurant cellar, because I mean, for me, it's, as Sarah said, this is, a surprise, because it is extremely still young or ready to drink, and this is a point that if you want to keep sherries and this kind of Manzanilla and Rama, I'm sure the temperature of keeping it or the conservation, it's crucial here, no? Because I mean, this wine, it looks like, well, just took from the cellar to your house, and that's something not always so easy to find. At least when you go and try to find all bottles of sherry, the conditions of those bottles are always, you never know. And in this case, I'm totally amazed, but I'm concerned about some other Manzanillas en Rama from old bottles that they have not been well kept.
Of course. Well, from my other experience with other types of Manzanillas, I think, is it a good way to describe these kind of old bottles as moving towards Amontillado already in a different way that you get in the cellar, but I mean in the bodega, but the kind of a rounder version with less of the pungency of the flor.
I get your point on the roundness and the velvety sensation, but I still find a lot of fino Manzanilla character here.
Of course, it's still hugely coastal and briny even, but there's also this roundness.
I agree.
To me, it's a matter of smoothness. I mean, it has rounded enormously. I mean, it's more. It's true that you don't get the tangent, the tangency. It's like pretty much softened. I have to say that one of the interesting things of these wines that have been kept for so long in the bottle is how they evolve in your glass. I don't know. I served my 1999 Manzanilla like half an hour ago, and it has changed. I have to say that now is beautiful in the nose. When I pour it for the first time, it was kind of it was like it was lacking all these vibrant life of the 2020. But then when I put it in my palate, it exploded, and it really started to show all that character, all that Manzanilla character. I don't think I agree with the idea that very old Manzanillas or very old Pinot, if kept a long time in the bottle, will become closer to the Amontillado. To me, what resembles the Amontillado is the roundness of the wine, but not the character. To me, still, this is profoundly Manzanilla, particularly in the palate. You have the saltiness and the dry edge and the beautiful, I'm going to say something which maybe in English doesn't sound very well, but dead flowers, right? I mean, and you get them in the aftertaste, and it's Manzanilla 100%, right? It lacks the nuttiness or the woody kind of seasoned winey wood of an Amontillado, which for me would be a must if you're tasting an Amontillado. You don't get it here, right?
No, of course.
But you get a lot of I mean, for me the 99, it's even more salty than the 2020. I mean,
absolutely.
Like the seaweed saltiness, like kind of I would say like more concentration here. No, maybe it was already, the wine was like this, but because red wines, when they age, they soften, no, and this wine, no, this wine has gained pungency and saltiness in a rounded way.
It's to me in the palate is very sapid.
Sapid.
It's very, very sapid, and this is what links this wine with the Albariza, with the soil. I mean that's what you get in your palate, at least to me, right?
But much more the 99 than the 20, no? Acidity, the sap, no?
No, you're right.
Lovely.
Well, the 20 has been bottled like a month, 2 months ago, so could we say that it's too young?
Well, that would be unfair.
Well,
but it does. You keep them, but keep them in a good place. I mean, you're right, absolutely, Ferran. I can't buy this now, the 20, and stick it in my cellar. I don't think it'll be, quite as good in 11 years' time.
Well, it's a good point.
Well, this is just the 37.5 centiliter version. So this was a half bottle.
Yeah.
Wow.
We had 2 half bottles. Imagine what this is like in a Magnum. I think it can easily go on for another 20 years. And
I agree.
Yeah.
For me, the 99 is an eye opening. So I'm totally amazed, honestly. I'm totally amazed. So I was not expecting such freshness here, to be honest. And if I might be, can I be disagree with Mr. Saldaña or not?
Sure.
Of course.
See, I'm allowed to do so. Perdón, because we were talking about now finos
Ruben,
and manzanilla.
Could you please switch off this guy?
Yeah.
So talking about finos and manzanillas, there is a place here in Barcelona called Maitea. I'm sure you know Maitea. And this guy kind of goes and finds really rare and old bottles, but I'm talking about entry-level finos and manzanillas, like Carta Blanca, like Laína, La Guita, even Inocentes, that we think they are from the 70s. Okay, and we like going there, opening them, and just tasting. And I could say sometimes, not always, but sometimes we find really nice surprises. Yeah,
well, probably, Ferran, those wines, when bottled back in the 70s, were very, very, very different to what today we know as a fino or a manzanilla. Certainly, they were not over-filtered, let's put it that way. Certainly, they were not cold treated. And probably were wines, you're talking about, you're not talking about manzanilla, you're talking mainly about finos, right?
Sí, Laína, Carta Blanca.
So probably, I would bet that these wines already had a little bit of oxidative agent in the barrel before being bottled. Probably. So they may have. What I mean is that if you have a wine that is like a manzanilla, certainly covered by the floor all throughout its life in the barrels, and then you put it in the bottle, and then it oxidates. Normally that would be, a bad version of oxidation, right? This is what we call remontado, which is the effect of oxygen in a weak wine, right? Obviously, if you have more strata, you're better off than in a one that has been over filtered. But anyway, I mean, I love this agreement.
And what is the decade when you start to do this health filtration and maybe younger products?
I would guess we're talking the 70s.
70s, okay.
Because this is when we started to have a real pressure on sales, right? I mean, these are the years of the boom, and probably it was not that easy to maintain the same level of aging for wines that had to be delivered, in big volumes. I'm not saying overnight, but from one year to the next. So probably at that time, the average age of all those brands that you referred to earlier on, probably there were wines that were aged longer before they were bottled. That's my guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
And probably other production things as well that changed. I mean, grapes would have been left outside in the sun for a brief period, even with Palomino very shortly.
But not as probably in the 50s, but I don't think because during the 60s and 70s, this is when you see the trend in the market for paler wines, right? So there was a reason for doing the Soleo for finos, because you would gain concentration, you would gain sugar, right? But the price you had to pay was paleness, right? Obviously, finos were much darker, and that change came around the I would say 70s. I can see advertisements from that period, and you could see the color of the same wine, and you name the brand. I mean, leading brands, and you see the color changing. year after year.
I guess that's something that makes the excitement and why we have such a large audience tonight. It's because we've lived through, all of us, a time of really technological wines. I mean, that was the great thing about sherry in those boom years. And at last now we're getting back to people reminding us what wines were like and what they could be like now. And it's very exciting. We have a question here from
Alessandro,
which I couldn't possibly answer.
So he said, is it true that a wine would be remontado in a few years and then it goes through another phase where it becomes drinkable again? It's something that I've experienced as well. I don't know for you, Ferran, for example, that a wine goes in waves, ups and downs, and that if you open it at some point, it's undrinkable, or at least not the same quality as a different bottle from the same stash, let's say, that you opened on another occasion.
Okay, I guess maybe because sometimes you open a fino like 3-4 years old and it's a bit remontado, but then suddenly you don't know why, but it is in 5 more years, so 10 years in total. It's a lovely wine. So I cannot explain it on in a proper way, but I have experienced something like that, like 4 years old fino being remontado, and then 5 more years, and the wine, it's beautiful. So it happens at least 2 or 3 times. So I'm not sure about it, and would love to hear your opinion. But I guess maybe that's a possibility. Yeah.
I don't have a chemical explanation either, but it's certainly true that it's something that you read from many experiences of people who opened wines, and that they say that it goes in waves. I think even Julian Jeffs already mentioned it in his sherry book at some point.
I don't have that experience. I mean, I don't know, maybe, right? But it's to me, remontado. It's a consequence of a weak wine being exposed to oxidation. But when you have a wine with enough strata, it evolves, at least in my experience, in a somehow linear way, right? I haven't experienced. It may happen. I don't know, but I don't have that experience. I've kept some bottles from the same, for instance, from my wedding, right? There was some Tio Pepe bottle because of my, on the occasion of my wedding, 1986, and I have a case of that, and I've been opening bottles of that, and I've found a reasonable evolution, but always in the same direction, right?
Okay.
That's my experience.
Okay. Well, we have one more question. Will aging further amplify the differences between specific vineyards in single vineyard bottlings? I'm personally not too sure about that, because you always lose some of the original wine, I think, and then it might be exactly this vineyard element. I don't know what you think. But in any case, in my experience, also my best experience was with bottle-aged finos and manzanillas, especially, were wines from the 50s and 60s, and they have been, well, they were bottled as a single vineyard, like you said, Blasquez or Domecq. They really had specific plots, and they made single vineyards wines. So that's really something that I'm looking for when I buy or intend to buy certain old bottles. Well, okay. Do you have some kind of elements that you look for when you decide which bottles to buy or not to buy? Really old ones, maybe? Ferran, I don't know.
Well, I try to buy because they are so difficult to get, and they are not normally not easy. I like to buy and then taste, and depending on the taste, and you decide, more or less like this. Might not have your experience on that, and after when we finish the tasting, I will ask you to tell us your suppliers for these all bottles.
Absolutely.
and hopefully we'll have some insights. No, I'm joking. No, you don't reveal your suppliers for that.
No, Ruben, it's interesting, and I think it relates to many other things. My pleasure is also driven by sentiment, as maybe César would say, with the wedding wine. So I had the good fortune to go to supper one evening during the first conference on the wines of the great wines of Andalusia with César and with Beltrán Domecq and Pepe Ferrer. And we went to Corral de la Moreria, which was, for me, a sensational moment. But what was sensational was that they kept bringing out wines from Williams and Humbert from Beltrán's history. And the wines didn't have a date on the back, but he would talk about the labels and what he remembered about the labels and how they fitted in with the family history and all of that. And it was just a magical moment. Then I could form my own opinion about the wines, but those are the moments when they absolutely sit in your heart. I come from a profession with masters of wine who are very inclined to say to you, this vintage is better than that vintage, and I remember drinking 1982 and it was so much better than 1964, and the kind of boasting about vintages. But actually, I think, especially with these wines, they bring an emotion which is super important, as much as particularly going for a particular one.
Yeah.
I think we have to distinguish two different areas here. I mean, obviously finding treasures is always exciting, and the reasons for finding those treasures can be just very objective on finding good wines from specific houses, or it can be emotional, as Sarah Jane was describing. I would be more on your side, Sarah Jane, of that. But what I think it opens now, this trend for, or this message of making bottle aging acceptable for sherry, is the possibility that some of you have been doing for a long time now, but might be new to many sherry consumers, of buying a whole case and keep it there, and finding the pleasure of opening one bottle a year or two bottles a year, and see how the wine is still alive and is showing different, expressing differently, and this is the to me, this is the beauty of bottle aging. I mean, my humble cellar at home, I normally try to buy several bottles of everything I buy, if they have potential for aging, and then I'm opening the. This is what is totally new, and it opens a completely broad and new perspective for sherry lovers.
But then, César, for that, we really need, honestly speaking, the vintage well shown on the label. So
yeah.
We don't need the vintage. I mean the date of the bottling, like something that you cannot understand, that doesn't give any value, that just freaks they know. No, we need to kind of show it in a proper way. Like, okay, this is the vintage of bottling, and that's it. No, but do it. I mean, not make things easier for wine lovers.
I fully agree.
Was going to say, it's fabulous. Ferran and I were recently in a tasting of the series of Palmas wines which González Bias had produced to celebrate that decade. And when I was first involved in it, the wine I selected in the first few years, they didn't say which year it was done, but Ferran, you did this year, and on the back of the label it says loud and clear 2020. There's no harm in saying the year. It's absolutely open to all. And actually, for us to do a tasting, a vertical tasting of 10 years worth, I mean, they were the different categories of Palmas, was exactly a textbook case of how the wines developed. Terrific.
Exactly.
I'm 100% convinced, Ferran.
Okay.
But it's
Sarah mentioned the Palmas. It's a very good example, because the first releases of Palmas still had a due date on the back. So they said you had to change it within 3 months.
like
Now they-
medicines.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let's move to the second wine.
Yeah.
So that's a sweet one. Let me just check it. A sweet one from Osborne, Bodegas Osborne in El Puerto. They have two ranges of very old rare sherries. And this one comes from the rarest wines in their cellars. It wasn't until the 1990s that they brought some of these wines to the market. And tonight we're having Solera India, which is an off-dry sherry containing about 80% of Palomino grapes and 20% of Pedro Jimenez. Both grapes and styles are aged together, mixed from the beginning. And under the latest regulations, this is now officially just a medium sherry. But the old bottle still said Oloroso because that's the biggest part of what's inside, of course. The Solera itself was founded in 1922. It was intended for Las Indias, the Indies. So mainly Peru and Colombia, where they had a number of Spanish diplomats who really liked this style. Nowadays, the bodega confirmed me that this Solera is refreshed with Amontillado, Oloroso, and Pedro Jimenez.
Wow.
Our oldest bottle dates back to between 1995 and 1998. So it's impossible. There's no code or anything that allows us to specify it further. But this kind of label was only made between these years, and the whole range had just been launched.
Ruben, is that the top of range of the winery?
Sorry?
Is that a top range of the winery?
This is the top range, yes. We have the gold label, which you see here, for the rarest, oldest cherries. Most of them are VRRS. This one isn't. It's 25 years average age. And then they also have more of a bronze label. It is just below like Puccino and those kind of wines.
Okay.
Let's pour these and see what we can say about them.
So, Ruben, a question. Just as you say, the younger one has the blending of Amontillado, PX Oloroso. The older one, do you know what was blended with a Palomino, or was it? Did it have a different treatment?
Well, it could have been more Oloroso. So for most of the time, the vast majority of the wines that went into the Solera have been Oloroso. That's also why it was still on the label on the old bottle. And so here it says Oloroso, Solera India.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Now it's a blend, and they can't mention the wines that are.
Stylistically, it is different in a way. It's not comparable between these two wines. You can't exactly follow the line. Yeah.
No, they look different wines. They look totally.
I agree that they look differently, but to me, it's been fascinating tasting those two wines because, I mean, you just look at the color and it's totally different, right? Yeah. And even when you move the wine in the glass, you can see immediately what you say, okay, this is closer to PX. There must be more Pedro Jimenez in this wine. But then you put it in your palate, and this is, I mean, the final sensation is totally dry. It's amazing. It might more percentage of Pedro Jimenez because it's much darker in color. Now you told me about the Amontillado. I didn't know that, Ruben. So that would explain a little bit the difference in color. But to me, it's been amazing to taste this old wine, and I was ready for a very sweet, very kind of syrupy wine, and the sensation that it left in my palate was totally dry. And another thing that I'm sure you have detected that, it might be a different blend, and Ferran, you're right. I don't think they're directly comparable. But they are from the same family. I mean, you get
That's true.
you get those varnish lac notes, which are very present in the two wines.
I agree on that. Yeah, I agree on this kind of profile, that the family profile. I can see that. So for me, they are more similar on the nose than on the palate, actually. Quite amazing the drying of the old bottle, quite the drying sensation at the back palate. For me, it's quite an amazing thing.
With a more profound bitterness as well as the.
I agree.
The modern example.
That's for Saracen because it's this kind of bitter of chocolate. No?
Absolutely. Speaking, yes, on behalf of the chocolate community, I can talk about that. No, what I find is interesting is that there has been in more recent times. I guess why I commented on it. By some bodegas, there has been an interest in softening these wines, making them more attractive to the end consumer. And obviously there is a commercial decision there. Do you produce, like this older one, something which is magically dry, but really demanding, or do you make it easier for them to drink? And it's a debate which, there's no right answer to, and you have to find your market. But it's been a pity, for me at least, to see some of the wines produced by some wineries being finished with a slightly sweeter polish. And that's why I think the older wine is just magical. There's something so special about it. Again, it's something that feels to me alive and will go on having lots of energy, which maybe I couldn't have guessed. But it reflects a different period, for sure. I mean, it may only be 85, perhaps you say, but it's terrific.
I find the recent bottling extremely elegant. Very, as you say, very nicely polished. I think that touch of Amontillado. Now, as I said, Ruben, that's new to me, and I was trying when I tasted before this session, I was saying, well, so fine. I mean, so elegant. And now that you mentioned the Amontillado, could be that.
Well, I think the wines have all been, the whole series has been upgraded in recent years, and they really. Some of them grew older as well.
Yes,
as far as I know, and then others were made rounder and more elegant, as you say. Exactly.
It's quite amazing because they are a bit. The nail varnish touch is so evident on the nose, but then on the palate is like all mellow. So you don't even feel the alcohol sensation at all. So it's quite interesting that this kind of nail varnish totally disappears on the palate. So quite well. Yeah.
Would you say it could be seen as a defect, the nail polish, or
no? I think
like that.
No. I think it's totally acceptable, and even I should say I like it. So
I know people seem to have difficulties.
It's a challenging flavor, very challenging. But once you get to it, it's incredible.
Well, maybe I wouldn't accept it in a still wine.
No,
Here I totally see the point, and I actually like it. Yeah. So beautiful.
We said before that bottle aging often is the kind of a mellowing over the years. I don't think this is true for this wine, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're very right. I think it has made this wine. I mean, because it's also a matter of concentration. What you get in this wine is an extreme. I mean, all the sensations that we're speaking about during this conversation. I mean, should be expressed in superlative, right? I mean, the bitterness is there, but it's there very, So I think it's the kind of one that express how the concentration can really bring flavors to a next level, right? And to me, there's one thing in this, the old bottle that really strikes me, and that's you can identify there all those nuances of extremely old PXs, right? The licorice and this chocolate, bitter chocolate. So it's like the PX, to me, in this wine, PX has a very, very, very important role, which I don't find that present in this wine, in the younger version, right? But PX, very old PX. We're not talking raisins, we're not talking fruits, we're talking evolution. Very good wines, both of them.
Question there from, I believe it's Yolanda from Spanish Wine Lover, who says, would you say these wines bear the Osborne style?
Well, what I've said is that they are from the same family. I mean, you could identify some characteristics in the wine that make a kind of link in time, right?
Yeah. But then if you see the whole series, some of these Soleras have been bought over from Agustín Blázquez and other bodegas that are now lost. So I always find it difficult to say, okay, this has an Osborne style, because maybe they've only looked after the Solera for the last 20, 30, 40 years, maybe. Not in this case of the Solera India, but with other Soleras, it's often the case. So.
But this Solera has been in the house for forever.
Correct. Yeah. It's one of the family Soleras, let's say.
Wow.
Gosh.
Nice, eh?
César, maybe about these kind of old gems that they find in the bodegas that haven't been brought to the market until quite recently. Do you think these kind of premium wines are the way forward for sherry to a certain extent? Because this is already, I think, 200 euros for a 50 cl bottle.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the peak of the iceberg, and definitely the peak is always important, right? Because this is what we talk about, and but definitely we need a much. My opinion is that we need a much a segmentation that is closer to consumers, right? To me, it doesn't make any sense that we have Boers and both, and virtually we have nothing. Well, we have 12, 15 years, but that's not something that bodegas unfortunately use as much as they should, in my opinion. One of the issues that is currently under discussion, and hopefully will go ahead, is a differentiation between wines that are aged for the minimum and wines that start aging in 7 years. Amontillado, Olorosos, minimum 7 years. And the same thing for Manzanillas, Finos, maybe with 5 years. So an extra segmentation in what we could consider the premium and the standard. This is super premium, and this is fine. But as you can imagine, no one can live on just these jewels, right? You have to have them, and it's great, and it's outstanding. But it is important that that normal consumers can also judge between and the equivalent in other regions to, crianza and reserva or gran reserva. I mean, something that would draw a line and say, okay, here you start having something that where time has had a serious role. Right. Yeah. So I think segmentation is always good for consumers. Here we're talking about just the peak of the iceberg. We have to go down a little bit. It's my opinion.
César, that's great to hear from you. What's fascinating is, if you think about Rioja, we're fighting against the definition of quality based on time. But actually, because there's more to that. There's more about Rioja, about the vineyard it comes from, all those kinds of things. Whereas here, yes, we have to talk about vineyards, but yes, to be able to segment that great mass of Fino from, I think the lowest in the regulation is 2 years. You can sell one with 2 years.
Correct.
And it's in the same family as, I don't know, something which is practically an Amontillado. Yeah, I can see absolutely that needs to be done. But it is interesting. I remember having a conversation with Barbadillo, in fact, who did a project with a very top wine. Whiskey doesn't have any problem at all in creating these a sort of range of wines, range of whiskies, which come. Clearly, it's a cut glass bottle that matters. Maybe that's the only thing that matters. But it's natural for consumers who have the cash to look for top whiskies, and it's just not something that's managed to work brilliantly well with sherry. But the opportunity is there.
Well, probably Rioja says that because they have always had it. I mean, they always had that, right? So they might be, okay, nothing is totally, nothing is the solution. Nothing is the answer, right? But it is true that today there's no difference at all between a Manzanilla after 2 years of aging and Manzanilla after 12 or 11, right? Or 10 years. I think this, in the same way that consumers will be very grateful to have the bottling dates, they will be grateful to have a clear idea of, for instance, what is a Manzanilla Pasada? When do you start to be able to call it a Manzanilla Pasada? We don't know. We don't know now. So we need to, and that's something that, quite frankly, I mean, of course, pricing is very important, but price something that can respond to many other factors, right? And I don't know, time is essential in the way that we produce our wines.
While you're here, I cannot resist doing it. Everybody must forgive me for this. One of the things I always get very agitated about is medium. I think that Ruben mentioned the word medium, and we have really here a terrific wine, which is medium. Are we going to have any movement on changing the name of that on categorizing it more? Is there any movement in the Consejo on that? Do you know at all, or European regulation?
Well, the movement is towards being able to use the name of the primary wine in your blend. That's it. But certainly these two wines here, they're not Olorosos. They're not. Oloroso is a dry wine. So they're Oloroso based. They are, I mean, they have Oloroso character. They have, but they're not Oloroso because Oloroso is a bone dry wine. It's the way it is. But of course, again, it's all about giving information, relevant information to consumers. Right, and one very, very relevant information about this wine is that the backbone of this blend is Oloroso. So this should be in the bottle. But you could not. I don't think you should mislead consumers, telling them that this is an Oloroso because it's not. It's not.
Yes.
Good. But if we change names, please. Can we find some glamorous names there?
Yes.
Because no, because medium, medium. I love medium, but medium is medium. It's in the middle of nowhere.
Well,
absolutely.
A beautiful name would be Oloroso Avocado.
Oh yeah.
Okay, nice.
Or if we add more sugar, if it's sweeter, we can say Oloroso Amoroso. Yeah.
Amoroso. That's the one. That's the one we want. Yeah, not medium. Amoroso. It's a lovely name.
Yeah,
it's all in the draft. It's all in the draft document.
Okay.
We move around in circles then because these names were there 20, 30 years ago, and now we can introduce them again.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah. Well, talking about styles, the last pair of wines, wines is even more difficult to have in a name or a style. It's Dulce Nombre, Viña Dulce Nombre from Bodegas González Vías.
Nice.
And this is really a wine that falls in between different stools. So this is one of the very rare sweet Palomino wines.
Mm.
And in fact, the modern bottle that I've selected was from the last harvest that González Beer produced in this style. So these are grapes from the Pago Carrascal. And these grapes, Palomino grapes, have been given the asoleo, the sun drying technique that is also used for Pedro Jimenez. González Díaz had 8 butts of this harvest still in their cellars. And this year, Antonio Flores selected 2 of them to be bottled as part of a recent series called Vinos Finitos, finite wines. Always singular, often lost styles of wines. So what we have here is quite rare because on the one hand, we have a bottle that probably dates back to between 1955 and 1965. We can't be sure, but for instance, we see that this bottle has a neck label, and that was left out from 1967, so it can't be later than that. And then this style of label with the black banding and all that was introduced in the mid-50s, so it has to be in between these dates.
Gosh.
What we're comparing now is, of course, totally different. In the other 2 pairs, we had basically the same wine, with the only difference being bottle aging. Now we have 1 bottle from the 1960, let's say, which has been given 60 years in the bottle. But the other one is bottled this year after 34 years in barrels. Whereas the old Dulce Nombre would have been quite a young wine. So let's see what this tells us.
Tell me, Ruben, what can you say about the alcohol on this? Was this fortified to 15, or what is the position with this wine?
The modern 2020 version is vinified to 15 degrees exactly, but we don't know about the old bottle. It simply doesn't have an alcohol indication. It wasn't necessary back then, so we can't be sure.
Yeah.
But I would say it's more or less in the same category.
But you have the strength, the alcohol strength in the bottle indicated in the bottle, in the label?
No, it doesn't say anything. So there's simply there's nothing on there. But back in the 1950s and 1960s, I rarely come across bottles that have an alcoholic strength. So.
I have go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, César. Go.
No, I was going to say because the alcohol is an interesting issue here.
Yes.
Because in the old bottle, I can detect this licorice. It's like you have those how do you call that? Cerezas en licor, ¿cómo se llama?
Cherries. Yes.
Cherries.
The cherries. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have that sensation of and which definitely you don't have it here, right?
Yeah.
Here, obviously, the fruit is much more prominent and evident, and very different ones.
The old bottle, it's almost kind of herbal to me, like like fresh herbs, like super alive now. So let's try notes more alive. I don't know why, but anyway, for me these 2 wines are totally well played by González Díaz. So I really love the style and the proposal on the Palomino. So much less sweet or sugary than a Pedro Jimenez. So it makes sense. It really makes sense.
So Ruben, do you know anything about what happened? Well, I suppose they stopped doing Asoleo. I can remember seeing it maybe at the end of the 1980s, something like that. Still, but this is such an interesting thing to have. Do you know anything more about sweet Palomino?
I think the problem with sweet Palomino or Asoleo of Palomino is the fact that the grapes are prone to rotting. And I think Jerez is much closer to the sea, so they have much more humidity during the night. And you can't just leave Palomino out on the beds for 2 weeks like they can do in Montilla Morilos, for instance, simply because of the humidity. But there are other bodegas like Lustau who still do this kind of style. And I think even González Vías has some plans to reinitiate this process as well.
Yeah.
There's a difference in acidity also. I mean, obviously the younger one having more, flatness in the palate, much more complexity in the case of the old dulce.
Do you think sugar just is kind of on the old one? The sugar level is, I mean, the sugar perception is, I would say, maybe less, no?
Much lower, yes.
Yes.
That's something that I get in most of the sweet wines from this era. I mean, after 60 years, the sweetness just goes down, and you get extra complexity with the herbal notes that you mentioned and all kinds of different layers that are coming in.
And it happens the same with very old PX, with very old Moscatel, or I mean, sweetness goes into secondary role, right? It's not so evident.
Well, I see Andrew there saying that there's very little bitterness or spiciness. And that's true, because if you compare to the Lustau wines, for instance, they have this peppery bite at the end, combined with the sweetness. And this is so velvety and deliciously sweet, but with enough acidity, and that is also important.
Well, I'm fascinated that you chose this. Did you think at all, since we're here at us kind of the sweet end, did you think about comparing two PXs at all? Did that pass through your mind, or were you always going to come to this one?
Well, I thought this was particularly interesting because you also have a comparison between bottle aging and barrel aging. Because it's not the same wine with different years in the cellar. It's something unique as well. I mean, you can't do this with any other wine that isn't aged in a solera. Try at the same time the same wine from the 60s and from now. So yeah, I thought this was a good idea because but a PX could have worked as well and could have even shown the same kind of evolution, I think.
Oh. The last one has something special, eh?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
So more layers of flavors or something. So the extra complexity is there.
But you can see that the first one, the younger one, is very well chosen. When you think across the great rainbow of sweet wines of the world, this is a very, it's a very well selected wine. I mean, it says something of its winemaker who was there to do the choosing and so on. It's a very, very nicely put together wine altogether. It's somebody who understands. Yeah, understands it.
There was a question about the origin of the grapes in the old wine, but obviously, probably because of the name, it was also dulce nombre, it was Carrascal, and that leads me to. I don't think you can do the same wines. I mean, this type of wines in all the Pagos in Jerez, right? So probably, if you want to do a sweet wine from Palomino, you have to select very well where you grow this Palomino for sweet wine. I mean, because you would probably need fruitness, but you will also need, a certain structure so that the wine will be able to evolve. There's an issue, of course, as you mentioned, Ruben, with the sun drying, which is so complicated here in humid area. So probably if you're doing the sun drying in places like Carrascal, which is relatively far from the coast, you're better off. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I guess this is, of course, in any wine you have to select where you choose the grapes, right? You have to be very careful about that factor. But if you want to treat Palomino grapes in this way, you have to be double careful.
I saw a question popping up about the specific vineyard. So as far as I know, I talked to Antonio Flores, the winemaker, and he said that they got their grapes from the Viña Esteves. And this is
again is
they always used for this type of vinification.
Yeah. Quite in the interior.
If people ask me what kind of wine they could start with if they would want to look into bottle aging, I always say they should start with a sweet wine, because as far as I experienced, it's the safer bet. I mean, I've rarely had sweet wines, even after so many years, that come out undrinkable. The evolution is always quite nice, and maybe not the same complexity as here, but it's always enjoyable, at least.
But how? Because interesting. Here's my chance to disagree, because in fact I would say this tasting has shown me that whichever category, you've chosen some really wonderful.
Of course, yeah.
Whichever category, and yes, there may be years when the wine may have a moment when it steps back, which is what happens to all great wines, but then it will come forward again. But this is absolutely ringing proof that whichever category you go for, choose a good wine, maybe a bodega that you like to follow, that you can keep in touch with. Buy their Fino or their Manzanilla and stay with it and keep coming back. It's such an exciting message. I need to communicate the story of sherry in a different way, as César, as you were saying. Don't just taste the sherry, write the tasting note, score it, and drink it now. We need to keep coming back to it.
Yeah.
Sorry, César, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that my answer to that same question, where do we start if we would start aging sherry? I think the excitement is in the extreme. Biological aging is very exciting. It's beautiful to see how solid Manzanillas or solid Finos can evolve in time in bottle, and sweet wines, of course. I mean, I agree. Sweet wines have my experience is with all PX, or also with all Moscatel is very, very nice. Dry Olorosos or dry Palos Cortados or dry Old Amontillado in bottle, they of course have an evolution, an interesting evolution, but you don't notice the differences so evidently, right? I think the excitement is in the two extremes.
Okay, great. I think we've come more or less to the end of the tasting. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I've proven my point of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally, and well, I think Jerez has a nice opportunity to break the traditions now, no, and just do some innovation here and a bit of betting on those on this concept of. I think I can see it very clearly on my side. Then market will tell. But you have selected such a beautiful wines, and it's here we have the proof here that it makes totally sense.
Okay, glad to hear that.
And Ruben, I would say that given this terrible year, the really good thing is that you have managed to bring many more of us together to do this tasting, or to hear, or to listen to it, and to be able to follow the record afterwards. And normally been the case. You might have done this tasting before, and it would have been, something that actually would have been for a very close, small group. But I think this is something now I shall keep the link and send it to people and say, listen to it and keep your sherry, drink some now and keep the rest till later.
Yeah, that's it.
And
apologies to other people who are following now without the samples. I mean, it's such a limited crowd, but
I'm sure it changes a lot when you have those, these glasses in front of you. From my side, thank you very much, Ruben. It was great. It was an outstanding experience to be able to share these beautiful wines with everybody. And the message that I take away with is we have to put the SACA date in the labels, right? So that's totally essential. And this was very useful for me in my work to convince the rest of the people here in Jerez that this is a very, very useful information for people, particularly now that sherry can also be aged in bottle.
Okay, those are the perfect words to end this talk. Thanks a lot again, and we'll hopefully be able to repeat this once more later, maybe in person.
Hopefully.
Well,
ciao, ciao. Thank you to all. Thanks.